Sarah Martinez had always dreamed of becoming a nurse. Growing up in a small town outside Denver, she watched her grandmother care for sick neighbors and saw how healing could happen through simple acts of kindness. After 4 years of nursing school and countless sleepless nights studying, Sarah finally landed her first job at Metropolitan General Hospital, one of the busiest medical centers in the city. At 23, Sarah was eager but nervous as she walked through the automatic doors on her first day. The hospital buzzed with constant activity, doctors rushing between rooms, nurses checking charts, and the steady beep of monitors creating a symphony of medical urgency. She had been assigned to the general medical ward, where patients recovered from various conditions and surgeries. Her supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, was a stern woman in her 50s who had worked at the hospital for over 20 years. She showed Sarah around the ward with military precision, explaining protocols and procedures with little warmth. "This is not nursing school anymore," Mrs. Henderson said sharply. "Here, we follow rules exactly. No exceptions, no personal attachments to patients. Do your job efficiently and go home." Sarah nodded eagerly, determined to prove herself worthy of the position she had worked so hard to achieve. The ward housed 36 beds, and Sarah was responsible for 12 patients during her 12-hour shifts. The work was demanding, administering medications, checking vital signs, updating charts, and responding to emergencies that seemed to happen every few minutes. During her first week, Sarah met various patients who each had their own stories and struggles. There was Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman recovering from hip surgery who missed her cat terribly. Mr. Rodriguez, a construction worker with a broken leg who worried about supporting his family while unable to work. And then, there was room 247, where an elderly man lay quietly, rarely speaking to anyone. The man in room 247 was Harold Thompson, an 82-year-old veteran who had been admitted with severe pneumonia. His chart indicated he had no emergency contacts and no visitors during his 3-week stay. Harold was thin and frail, with weathered hands that shook slightly when he tried to hold his water cup. His silver hair was neatly combed, and, despite his illness, he maintained a dignified posture even while lying in bed. What struck Sarah most about Harold was his eyes. They held decades of stories, pain, and wisdom, but also a deep loneliness that seemed to penetrate the sterile hospital air. While other patients complained loudly or demanded attention, Harold remained quietly polite, saying please and thank you even when asking for the smallest assistance. During her rounds, Sarah noticed that Harold's meals often went untouched. When she asked if he was experiencing nausea or loss of appetite, he simply said the food was fine but that eating alone had never been enjoyable for him. This simple comment touched something deep in Sarah's heart. She began spending a few extra minutes in his room during mealtimes, chatting about the weather or current events while Harold ate. These small conversations revealed fascinating glimpses into Harold's past. He had served in the Navy during the Vietnam War, working as a communications specialist on a destroyer. He spoke softly about the beauty of sunrises over the ocean and the camaraderie among sailors who became like brothers. After the war, Harold had worked as a radio technician for 40 years, never marrying because he said he never found someone who could understand the nightmares that sometimes visited him in the darkness. Harold had one daughter from a brief relationship in his 20s, but they had lost contact decades ago. His only family was a sister who lived in a nursing home across the state, suffering from advanced dementia. Harold's apartment was small and simple, filled mostly with books and old radio equipment he tinkered with to keep his mind sharp. As the days passed, Sarah found herself looking forward to her conversations with Harold. He was intelligent and well-read, able to discuss everything from history to technology with surprising insight. Despite his illness, he maintained a gentle sense of humor and genuine interest in Sarah's life and dreams. He asked about her nursing school experiences and listened intently as she described her hopes of specializing in pediatric care someday. Harold's condition began improving steadily. His fever broke, his breathing became easier, and his appetite returned somewhat. The doctors were pleased with his progress and began discussing discharge plans. However, this news brought unexpected anxiety for Harold. He confided in Sarah that he was nervous about returning to his empty apartment, especially since he still felt weak and unsteady. The hospital's social worker had arranged for a visiting nurse to check on Harold twice a week after discharge, but Harold worried about the long hours between visits. He had no neighbors he knew well enough to call for help, and his pride prevented him from wanting to burden anyone with his needs. Sarah could see the fear in his eyes as the discharge date approached, not fear of dying, but fear of dying alone and forgotten. One evening during Sarah's night shift, she found Harold sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the city lights. He seemed more melancholy than usual, and, when Sarah asked if he was feeling all right, Harold shared something that would stay with her forever. He told her about a young sailor he had served with named Jimmy, who was only 19 years old and scared during their first combat situation. Harold had taken Jimmy under his wing, teaching him communication protocols and helping him write letters to his girlfriend back home. During a particularly intense night of enemy fire, Harold stayed with Jimmy in the communications room, keeping him calm and focused on their vital work of coordinating with other ships. Jimmy made it through that night and many others, eventually returning home safely to marry his girlfriend. "That's what I remember most about the service," Harold told Sarah quietly. "Not the fear or the danger, but how we took care of each other. How a small act of kindness could mean the difference between hope and despair." He paused, looking directly at Sarah with gratitude in his eyes. "You've done that for me here. Made me feel like a person instead of just another patient waiting to leave." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized how much these simple conversations had meant to Harold. She had never considered that sitting with someone during a meal or listening to their stories could be as important as administering medication or checking vital signs. Harold had taught her something about nursing that wasn't covered in any textbook: the healing power of human connection. The next morning, Mrs. Henderson called Sarah into her office for what she assumed would be a routine performance review. Instead, she faced serious criticism about her time management and patient interactions. Mrs. Henderson had been monitoring Sarah's activities and noted that she was spending excessive time with certain patients, particularly Harold Thompson. "Nursing is about medical care, not social work," Mrs. Henderson explained coldly. "You're here to follow protocols and ensure patient safety, not to become emotionally involved with every sad story that walks through these doors. Your efficiency ratings are below acceptable standards because you waste time chatting instead of completing your assigned duties." Sarah tried to explain that her conversations with patients like Harold were helping their recovery and emotional well-being, which she believed was an important part of nursing care. Mrs. Henderson dismissed this reasoning immediately, stating that the hospital operated on strict schedules and productivity measures. Nurses who couldn't maintain proper professional boundaries and time management would not succeed in their demanding environment. "Consider this your official warning," Mrs. Henderson concluded. "Focus on your medical responsibilities and leave the personal interactions to the chaplains and social workers. If I continue to receive reports about excessive time spent socializing with patients, there will be consequences for your employment here." Sarah left the meeting feeling frustrated and confused. Everything she had learned about compassionate care seemed to conflict with the hospital's emphasis on efficiency and emotional detachment. She wondered if she had misunderstood what nursing was supposed to be, or if she simply wasn't suited for this profession she had worked so hard to enter. That afternoon, Sarah found herself being more distant with Harold, limiting their interactions to purely medical necessities. She could see the confusion and hurt in his eyes as she quickly checked his vital signs and left without their usual conversation. Harold didn't ask why she seemed different, but his expression suggested he blamed himself for somehow causing trouble for the young nurse who had brightened his difficult days. The situation became even more complicated when Harold's discharge date was moved up unexpectedly. A surge of new patients meant the hospital needed his bed sooner than planned. Harold would be leaving the next morning, and Sarah realized she might not have another chance to properly say goodbye or ensure he felt prepared for the transition home. As her shift ended that evening, Sarah faced a decision that would change everything. She could follow Mrs. Henderson's instructions and maintain professional distance, or she could follow her instincts about what Harold needed during his final night in the hospital. The choice would set in motion a series of events that nobody could have predicted. Sarah couldn't sleep that night after her shift ended. She kept thinking about Harold's worried expression and the way he had seemed to retreat into himself after her supervisor's warning. She had entered nursing to help people heal, not just physically but emotionally too. The conflict between her instincts and the hospital's rigid policies felt like a betrayal of everything she believed about healthcare. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Sarah's mood as she walked into the hospital for what would be Harold's discharge day. She had made her decision during the sleepless hours before dawn. Despite Mrs. Henderson's warning, she couldn't let Harold leave without proper support and care. Sometimes doing the right thing required accepting the consequences. Harold was awake early, sitting on the edge of his bed with his few belongings packed in a small duffel bag that had seen better days. His discharge paperwork lay on the bedside table, and the social worker had already reviewed his home care instructions. Officially, everything was in order for Harold to return to his apartment. Unofficially, Sarah could see the anxiety written across his weathered face. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said gently, checking his chart one final time. "How are you feeling about going home today?" Harold attempted a weak smile. "I suppose I'm as ready as I'll ever be. The doctors say I'm much better, and I am grateful for all the care I've received here." He paused, looking directly at Sarah. "Especially your kindness. I know you got in trouble for spending time with an old man, and I'm sorry about that." Sarah's heart ached hearing Harold blame himself for her supervisor's criticism. She sat down in the chair beside his bed, a deliberate choice to prioritize their conversation over her other duties. "Mr. Thompson, you have nothing to apologize for. Taking care of people means more than just medical procedures. You taught me something important about that." They talked for nearly an hour as Harold shared his concerns about managing at home while still recovering his strength. He worried about grocery shopping, preparing meals, and what would happen if he had a medical emergency alone in his apartment. The visiting nurse visits were scheduled for Tuesdays and Fridays, but Harold feared the long stretches between visits when anything could go wrong. During their conversation, Harold mentioned something that caught Sarah's attention. He still had his old Navy communications equipment in his apartment, including a radio setup he used to talk with other veterans around the country. Every evening, he participated in an informal network of former servicemen who checked in with each other, sharing news and providing mutual support across the airwaves. "It's probably silly," Harold said with embarrassment, "but those radio conversations are the highlight of my days. Hearing familiar voices and knowing other old sailors are out there living their lives helps me feel less alone. I've been worried that I won't have the energy to maintain the radio schedule after I get home." Sarah found this detail fascinating and deeply moving. Harold had created his own support network through technology and shared military experience, but his recent illness had weakened him too much to participate fully. She realized that helping Harold maintain these vital connections might be more important than any medication or follow-up appointment. As Harold's official discharge time approached, Sarah made a decision that would define her career. She arranged to take her lunch break early and offered to personally escort Harold home to help him get settled. This was far beyond normal nursing responsibilities and directly violated Mrs. Henderson's instructions about professional boundaries. Harold was touched but concerned about Sarah risking her job for his sake. "Young lady, you've already done more than enough for this old sailor. I don't want to cause you any more trouble at work." But Sarah insisted, explaining that she wanted to ensure his radio equipment was working properly and that he felt comfortable in his apartment before the first visiting nurse arrived. The trip to Harold's apartment revealed more about his circumstances than Sarah had realized. He lived in a modest building in an older part of town, where many of the residents were elderly people on fixed incomes. Harold's apartment was small but immaculately clean, with military precision evident in how everything was organized and maintained. The radio equipment dominated one corner of the living room, an impressive setup with multiple transceivers, antennas, and logbooks where Harold recorded his daily conversations with other veterans. Sarah was amazed by the complexity of the system and Harold's obvious expertise in maintaining it. This wasn't just a hobby, it was Harold's lifeline to a community that understood his experiences and valued his continued presence. Harold showed Sarah around his apartment with obvious pride despite its humble nature. The refrigerator contained mostly expired items that needed to be discarded, and Sarah noticed that Harold moved slowly and carefully, still weak from his recent illness. She helped him organize his medications according to the discharge instructions and programmed important phone numbers into his telephone. Most importantly, Sarah helped Harold test his radio equipment to ensure it was functioning properly. As they worked together to adjust the antennas and check the signal strength, Harold's energy and enthusiasm returned noticeably. This equipment represented his connection to the outside world and his sense of purpose in an otherwise isolated existence. When Harold successfully made contact with another veteran in Texas, his face lit up with genuine joy. The conversation was brief but warm, with both men expressing relief at re-establishing contact after Harold's hospital absence. Sarah realized she was witnessing something profound, the power of community and belonging that transcended physical distance and individual limitations. Before leaving Harold's apartment, Sarah did something that would later have serious consequences. She gave Harold her personal cell phone number, instructing him to call if he experienced any health concerns or emergencies before the visiting nurse arrived. This was strictly against hospital policy, which prohibited nurses from having personal contact with patients outside of official duties. "I know this isn't normal procedure," Sarah explained, "but I want you to know someone is looking out for you during this transition. Don't hesitate to call if you need anything, even if it seems minor. Promise me you won't try to handle everything alone." Harold was deeply moved by Sarah's gesture and promised to call if necessary. As Sarah prepared to leave, Harold stood as straight as his weakened condition allowed and offered a formal military salute. "Thank you, Nurse Martinez. You've honored the finest traditions of service by taking care of one of your own." Sarah returned to the hospital an hour late from her lunch break, knowing she would face questions about her extended absence. She had chosen to prioritize Harold's welfare over following institutional rules, and she accepted that this decision might have professional consequences. Mrs. Henderson was waiting in Sarah's assigned area when she returned, clearly angry about the unauthorized absence. Other staff members had noticed Sarah's missing presence during a busy lunch period, and patients had been asking for her while she was away. The supervisor's expression made it clear that Sarah's warning period was about to end abruptly. "Where exactly have you been for the past 2 hours?" Mrs. Henderson demanded. "Your lunch break ended an hour ago, and your patients needed attention that other nurses had to provide. This is completely unacceptable behavior." Sarah decided to be honest about her activities, explaining that she had helped Harold get settled at home and ensured he was prepared for his recovery period. She knew this honesty might cost her job, but she refused to lie about doing what she believed was right for her patients' well-being. Mrs. Henderson's response was swift and severe. "You have violated multiple policies regarding patient boundaries, time management, and professional conduct. Providing personal contact information to patients is strictly forbidden, as is making unauthorized visits to patient homes. Your employment here is terminated immediately." The shock of sudden unemployment hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had worked so hard to become a nurse, and now her career was ending before it had truly begun. Other staff members watched in stunned silence as Mrs. Henderson escorted Sarah to collect her personal belongings and surrender her hospital identification. As Sarah cleaned out her locker, several colleagues approached to express their support and disbelief at the harsh punishment. Many of them admired what Sarah had done for Harold, even if they couldn't risk their own jobs by saying so publicly. The head of the pediatric unit, Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, quietly told Sarah that her compassionate approach was exactly what nursing needed more of, not less. "You did the right thing," Dr. Gonzalez whispered. "Sometimes the system punishes people for being better than it deserves. Don't let this discourage you from continuing in healthcare." Sarah left Metropolitan General Hospital that afternoon carrying a box of personal items and feeling devastated about her future. She had student loans to repay, rent to cover, and now no income or immediate job prospects. The nursing field was competitive, and being terminated for policy violations would make finding another position extremely difficult. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. She believed in what she had done for Harold, but the practical consequences were overwhelming. She had sacrificed her financial security and professional reputation for one patient's welfare, and she wasn't sure how to explain that decision to potential future employers. Around 8 o'clock, Sarah's cell phone rang with a call from Harold's number. Her heart raced as she answered, worried that he was experiencing a medical emergency that would require immediate attention. Instead, Harold's voice was stronger and more animated than she had heard since his admission to the hospital. "Sarah, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time," Harold said excitedly. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did today, and to share some wonderful news. During tonight's radio check-in, I told my Navy buddies about the outstanding care I received from a young nurse who went above and beyond her duties. Word is spreading through the veteran community about what happened." Harold explained that his story had resonated with veterans across multiple radio networks, many of whom had their own experiences with healthcare workers who had made significant differences in their lives. Several retired Navy personnel had asked for more details about Sarah's situation, wanting to find ways to recognize her exceptional service to a fellow veteran. "I may have mentioned that you lost your job for helping me," Harold continued apologetically. "I hope that was all right to share. These old sailors get pretty protective when they hear about good people being punished for doing the right thing." Sarah assured Harold that she didn't mind him sharing their story, though she wondered what practical difference it could make. She was more concerned about Harold's health and adjustment to being home alone. Harold reported that he felt stronger after their afternoon together and was optimistic about managing his recovery with the support systems they had established. As they ended their conversation, Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty. She was glad Harold was doing well, but her own future remained unclear. She had followed her instincts about compassionate care, but the real world demanded practical solutions to financial and professional challenges. What Sarah didn't know was that Harold's radio conversations had set in motion a chain of events that would transform her situation in ways she could never have imagined. The veteran community had networks and resources that extended far beyond their informal radio communications, and Sarah's story was about to reach some very influential ears. Over the next 3 days, Sarah struggled with the reality of her unemployment while trying to maintain a positive outlook about her future in nursing. She spent hours updating her resume and searching for job openings, but explaining her termination from Metropolitan General remained a significant challenge. Most nursing positions required references from previous employers, and Mrs. Henderson's evaluation would hardly be favorable. Meanwhile, Harold's story continued spreading through veteran networks with remarkable speed and reach. What had started as informal radio conversations between retired Navy personnel had evolved into something much larger and more organized. Harold discovered that several of his radio contacts had impressive credentials and current positions that gave them significant influence within veteran affairs and healthcare communities. One of Harold's regular radio partners was Commander James Mitchell, a retired Navy officer who now worked as a liaison between veteran organizations and federal healthcare initiatives. Commander Mitchell had been deeply moved by Harold's account of Sarah's compassionate care and professional sacrifice. He began making phone calls to colleagues in various veteran support organizations, sharing the story and asking for advice about potential responses. Another frequent participant in Harold's radio network was Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos, who had transitioned from Navy service to become a patient advocate at a major veterans medical center. Chief Santos understood both the healthcare system's limitations and the unique needs of veteran patients. She was outraged that a nurse had been punished for providing exactly the kind of care that veterans desperately needed but rarely received. On Thursday morning, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from someone identifying himself as Dr. Robert Chen, the Chief of Staff at Liberty Veterans Medical Center, a prestigious facility about 40 miles from her apartment. Dr. Chen explained that he had heard about her situation through veteran community networks and wanted to discuss potential employment opportunities. Sarah was initially skeptical, wondering if this might be some kind of elaborate joke or scam. Dr. Chen seemed to understand her hesitation and provided specific details about her care for Harold Thompson that only someone with genuine insider knowledge could possess. He invited Sarah to visit Liberty Veterans Medical Center for an informal meeting the following day. "Ms. Martinez," Dr. Chen said seriously, "the veteran community takes care of its own, and that includes people who take care of veterans. What happened to you represents everything wrong with modern healthcare bureaucracy. We'd like to discuss how you might continue your nursing career in an environment that values compassion as much as competence." That same Thursday, Harold received a visit from Commander Mitchell, who had driven 3 hours to meet the veteran whose story had captured so much attention. Commander Mitchell was an imposing figure despite his retirement, carrying himself with the bearing and confidence that came from decades of military leadership. Harold was surprised and honored by this unexpected visit from someone he had only known through radio communications. Commander Mitchell spent 2 hours with Harold, listening to detailed accounts of his hospital experience and Sarah's extraordinary care. He was particularly interested in the specific ways Sarah had gone beyond normal nursing duties to address Harold's emotional and social needs during his recovery. Commander Mitchell took careful notes and asked permission to share Harold's story with additional veteran organizations and healthcare advocacy groups. Harold, Commander Mitchell explained, your experience illustrates a critical problem in how our healthcare system treats veterans, especially those without family support networks. This young nurse understood something that most medical professionals miss: healing involves more than just treating symptoms. She recognized your service and treated you with the dignity you earned through your military commitment. Commander Mitchell also revealed that veteran organizations had been documenting similar cases across the country, where healthcare workers who provided exceptional care to veterans faced institutional pressure to limit their compassion and personal investment in patient outcomes. Sarah's case was particularly egregious because she had been terminated for behavior that should have been celebrated and emulated. Friday morning found Sarah driving to Liberty Veterans Medical Center with a mixture of hope and anxiety. The facility was impressive, with modern buildings set among landscaped grounds that conveyed both professionalism and warmth. Unlike the sterile, hurried atmosphere of Metropolitan General, this medical center seemed designed to promote healing through environmental comfort as well as clinical excellence. Dr. Chen met Sarah in his office, a comfortable space filled with military memorabilia and photographs of various veteran events and celebrations. He was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who had served as a Navy physician before transitioning to veteran healthcare administration. His manner was warm but professional, and Sarah immediately felt more relaxed than she had during any interaction with Mrs. Henderson. Ms. Martinez, Dr. Chen began, let me start by saying that what happened to you at Metropolitan General represents everything we try to avoid in veteran healthcare. Our approach here is built on the principle that healing requires attention to the whole person, not just their medical symptoms. Veterans especially need healthcare providers who understand service and sacrifice. Dr. Chen explained that Liberty Veterans Medical Center had been following developments in veteran healthcare quality, particularly focusing on patient satisfaction and long-term recovery outcomes. They had discovered that veterans who received care from providers who took personal interest in their well-being recovered faster, had fewer readmissions, and reported significantly higher satisfaction with their treatment experience. We've been looking for nurses who understand that caring for veterans requires more than technical competence, Dr. Chen continued. It requires respect for their service, understanding of their unique challenges, and willingness to go beyond minimum requirements when circumstances warrant additional support. Your actions with Mr. Thompson demonstrate exactly the approach we want to cultivate here. Sarah was amazed to learn that Liberty Veterans Medical Center not only encouraged the kind of patient interaction that had gotten her fired, but actively trained their staff to develop meaningful connections with veteran patients. The facility had specialized programs for isolated veterans, mental health support integrated into all medical care, and policies that gave healthcare workers flexibility to address patient needs that extended beyond purely medical concerns. Dr. Chen offered Sarah a position as a staff nurse on their general medical unit, with a starting salary higher than her previous job and comprehensive benefits including continuing education opportunities. More importantly, he emphasized that her approach to patient care was exactly what they valued and wanted to develop further among their nursing staff. We'd also like you to consider participating in our Veteran Care Specialization Program, Dr. Chen explained. It's additional training in understanding military culture, trauma-informed care, and building therapeutic relationships with veteran patients. Your natural instincts for this kind of care suggest you could become an exceptional specialist in veteran nursing. Sarah accepted the position immediately, feeling overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events. What had seemed like a career-ending mistake at Metropolitan General had become an opportunity to join a healthcare team that shared her values about compassionate patient care. She would start the following Monday, giving her weekend to prepare for this new chapter in her nursing career. That afternoon, Sarah called Harold to share the good news about her new job. Harold was delighted but not entirely surprised, explaining that the veteran community had been working behind the scenes to ensure Sarah's sacrifice on his behalf didn't go unrecognized. He had been receiving calls and messages from veterans across the country who wanted to express their appreciation for her service to their community. "Sarah," Harold said with emotion, "you need to understand something important. When you helped me, you didn't just care for one old sailor. You honored every veteran who has ever felt forgotten or alone in their time of need. That kind of service creates ripples that extend far beyond what you can see." Harold also shared that his health continued improving steadily. The visiting nurse had been impressed with his medication organization and home setup, crediting the thorough preparation he had received from an exceptional hospital nurse. Harold's radio network remained active and supportive, with several veterans planning to visit him in person over the coming weeks. Over the weekend, Sarah received several phone calls and messages from veterans who had heard her story through various networks. Each caller wanted to personally thank her for her service to Harold and to express their appreciation for healthcare workers who understood the unique needs of military veterans. These conversations gave Sarah deeper insight into the veteran community's culture of mutual support and loyalty. One particularly meaningful call came from Chief Santos, the patient advocate Harold had mentioned. Chief Santos explained that veteran organizations were documenting Sarah's case as an example of how healthcare institutions could better support both veterans and the staff who cared for them. Sarah's story was being shared at healthcare conferences and policy discussions as evidence for changes in how medical facilities approached veteran care. "What you did for Harold represents the gold standard of veteran healthcare," Chief Santos explained. "You saw beyond his medical symptoms to address his deeper needs for connection and dignity. That's exactly what military service members do for each other, look out for one another even when it involves personal risk or sacrifice." Chief Santos also revealed that Sarah's story had reached some very high levels within veteran affairs and military healthcare communities. Several influential leaders had taken particular interest in her case, recognizing it as an example of the kind of care all veterans deserved but rarely received. This attention was generating discussions about policy changes and recognition programs for healthcare workers who provided exceptional veteran care. Sunday evening, as Sarah prepared for her first day at Liberty Veterans Medical Center, she reflected on the incredible journey from Harold's bedside to this new opportunity. Her decision to prioritize Harold's well-being over institutional rules had initially seemed like a career-ending mistake. Instead, it had connected her with a community that valued exactly the kind of nurse she wanted to become. Sarah realized that Harold had taught her something profound about the true nature of service. Military veterans understood that sometimes doing the right thing required personal sacrifice, whether on a battlefield or in a hospital room. They also understood that such sacrifices created bonds of loyalty and mutual support that lasted long after the immediate crisis had passed. As she set her alarm for Monday morning, Sarah felt a sense of purpose and belonging that had been missing during her brief time at Metropolitan General. She was about to begin working with patients who would understand her commitment to compassionate care, and colleagues who shared her belief that healing involved more than just medical procedures. What Sarah didn't yet know was that her story had reached even higher levels of attention than Chief Santos had revealed. The veteran community's network of influence extended into some very surprising places, and Monday morning would bring developments that no one could have anticipated. Harold's simple radio conversations had set in motion events that would transform not just Sarah's career, but her understanding of how service and sacrifice could create unexpected opportunities for recognition and reward. Monday morning began perfectly for Sarah as she drove to her first day at Liberty Veterans Medical Center. The facility's atmosphere immediately felt different from Metropolitan General, warmer, more personal, with staff members who seemed genuinely happy to be at work. During orientation, Sarah met nurses who shared stories about meaningful relationships they had built with veteran patients, exactly the kind of connections that had gotten her fired from her previous job. Her new supervisor, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Williams, retired, was a former Army nurse who had transitioned to civilian healthcare after 20 years of military service. Colonel Williams understood both military culture and the unique healthcare needs of veterans, creating an environment where compassionate care was encouraged rather than discouraged. Ms. Martinez, Colonel Williams said during their first meeting, we've heard about your situation with Mr. Thompson, and we want you to know that your approach represents exactly what we're trying to achieve here. Veterans need healthcare providers who understand service and sacrifice, and who are willing to go the extra mile when circumstances require it. Sarah was assigned to a unit that specialized in caring for elderly veterans with complex medical and social needs. Many of her patients were in situations similar to Harold's, isolated, dealing with service-related health issues, and struggling with the transition from independent living to requiring medical support. The unit's approach emphasized building therapeutic relationships while providing excellent clinical care. Her first patient was Frank Morrison, an 85-year-old Korean War veteran who had been admitted with complications from diabetes. Like Harold, Frank had no family nearby and seemed withdrawn from staff interactions. Using the lessons she had learned from Harold's case, Sarah took time to learn about Frank's military service and personal interests, discovering that he had been a combat engineer who took pride in building infrastructure under difficult conditions. By Tuesday afternoon, Sarah had established meaningful connections with several patients on her unit. The other nursing staff noticed her natural ability to engage with veterans, and Colonel Williams began discussing advanced training opportunities that could help Sarah develop specialized expertise in veteran healthcare. Meanwhile, Harold's story continued spreading through veteran networks with reach and influence that surprised even Commander Mitchell. The narrative had evolved beyond a simple account of one nurse helping one veteran into a broader discussion about healthcare quality, veteran care standards, and the need to recognize healthcare workers who went above and beyond their basic duties. On Tuesday evening, Harold received a phone call that would change everything. The caller identified himself as Admiral Robert Hayes, a retired Navy admiral who now served as a special advisor to veteran healthcare initiatives at the federal level. Admiral Hayes had been following Harold's story through multiple veteran networks and wanted to discuss some remarkable developments. Mr. Thompson, Admiral Hayes said, your account of Nurse Martinez's exceptional care has reached some very interested parties. We've been looking for concrete examples of the kind of healthcare that veterans deserve, and your experience provides exactly the evidence we need to support some important policy initiatives. Admiral Hayes explained that veteran healthcare advocacy groups had been working with federal agencies to develop new recognition programs for healthcare workers who provided outstanding care to military veterans. Sarah's case was being considered as the inaugural example for a National Healthcare Excellence Award specifically focused on veteran care. More immediately, Admiral Hayes revealed that arrangements were being made for a special recognition ceremony to honor Sarah's service to the veteran community. This event would take place at Liberty Veterans Medical Center and would include representatives from multiple veteran organizations, healthcare advocacy groups, and federal agencies. We want to send a clear message, Admiral Hayes continued, that healthcare workers who understand and honor military service deserve recognition and support from the entire veteran community. Ms. Martinez sacrificed her job to provide exceptional care for you, and we want to ensure that sacrifice becomes an inspiration rather than a cautionary tale. Harold was amazed by these developments and immediately called Sarah to share the news. Sarah was overwhelmed by the scope of attention her simple act of caring for Harold had generated. She had never intended to become a symbol or spokesperson for veteran healthcare, she had simply done what felt right for a patient who needed extra support. Wednesday morning brought even more surprising developments. Dr. Chin called Sarah into his office to inform her that Liberty Veterans Medical Center would be hosting a special recognition ceremony on Friday afternoon. Representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs, multiple veteran service organizations, and healthcare advocacy groups would be attending to honor Sarah's exemplary service. Sarah, Dr. Chen explained, your story has resonated throughout the veteran community because it represents the kind of care that all veterans deserve but don't always receive. This ceremony is about more than just recognizing you, it's about establishing new standards for veteran healthcare and inspiring other healthcare workers to follow your example. Dr. Chen also revealed that Sarah had been selected to receive the inaugural Veterans Healthcare Excellence Award, a new recognition program developed specifically to honor healthcare workers who provided outstanding care to military veterans. The award came with a significant monetary prize and opportunities for continued education in veteran healthcare specialization. Thursday afternoon brought the most unexpected development of all. Sarah was working with her patients on the veteran unit when Colonel Williams approached with an expression of barely contained excitement. She informed Sarah that some very special visitors would be arriving the next morning for the recognition ceremony. "Sarah," Colonel Williams said, "I need you to be prepared for something quite remarkable tomorrow. The veteran community has resources and connections that extend far beyond what most people realize. Your service to Mr. Thompson has been recognized at levels that might surprise you." Friday morning dawned clear and bright as Sarah arrived at work, wondering what exactly the recognition ceremony would involve. She had been told to expect media attention and representatives from various veteran organizations, but the specific details had been kept deliberately vague. Harold had been invited to attend and would be arriving by special transportation arranged by Veteran Services. Around 10 o'clock, staff members throughout the medical center began gathering near the windows facing the facility's main parking area. Sarah could hear an unusual sound in the distance that seemed to be growing louder, a rhythmic thumping that she couldn't quite identify. Colonel Williams found Sarah and suggested she join the crowd at the windows. The sound became unmistakably recognizable as a helicopter approached the medical center. But this wasn't a medical transport helicopter, it was a Navy aircraft with official military markings. Sarah watched in amazement as the helicopter circled the facility once before landing smoothly on the medical center's helipad, which was normally used only for emergency medical flights. "Sarah," Colonel Williams said with a smile, "your ceremony just became much more significant than any of us anticipated. That helicopter is carrying some very important people who wanted to personally honor your service to the veteran community." As the helicopter powered down, several figures in Navy uniforms emerged, followed by civilians in formal attire who clearly held positions of considerable authority. Sarah recognized Admiral Hayes from photographs she had seen in veteran publications, but the other passengers were unfamiliar to her. Colonel Williams explained that one of the civilians was the Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs, who had personally requested to participate in Sarah's recognition ceremony. The group was met by Dr. Chen and other medical center leadership, then escorted into the facility's main conference room where the ceremony would take place. Sarah was amazed to see that Harold had indeed arrived for the event, looking stronger and more vibrant than she had seen him since their first meeting at Metropolitan General Hospital. The recognition ceremony was unlike anything Sarah could have imagined when she first sat down to eat lunch with a lonely veteran 3 weeks earlier. Admiral Hayes spoke about the importance of healthcare workers who understood military service and were willing to make personal sacrifices to provide exceptional care. The Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs presented Sarah with the Veterans Healthcare Excellence Award and announced that her story would be featured in a national campaign to improve veteran healthcare standards. "Nurse Martinez," the Deputy Secretary said, "your actions represent the finest traditions of service that veterans understand and value. You put the well-being of a veteran above your own professional security, demonstrating the same spirit of sacrifice that military personnel show for their country and each other." The ceremony also included the announcement of a new policy initiative requiring healthcare facilities that serve veterans to develop training programs focused on military culture and veteran-specific care needs. Sarah's case had provided the compelling evidence needed to support this policy change, which would improve care for veterans throughout the healthcare system. Harold was invited to speak during the ceremony, and his words brought tears to many eyes in the room. He described not just Sarah's medical care, but her recognition of his dignity, service, and humanity during a vulnerable time in his life. Harold emphasized that Sarah had demonstrated the core military values of loyalty, duty, and selfless service that connected her to the broader veteran community. "This young nurse understood something that many people miss," Harold said with emotion. "Veterans don't just need medical treatment, they need recognition that their service mattered and that they still have value in their communities. Sarah gave me that recognition when I needed it most, and her sacrifice to help me has inspired an entire community of veterans to support her in return." The ceremony concluded with the announcement that Sarah had been accepted into an accelerated veteran healthcare specialization program that would be funded entirely by veteran organizations. This program would prepare her to become a leader in veteran healthcare, with opportunities to influence policy development and train other healthcare workers in veteran-specific care approaches. As the distinguished visitors prepared to depart via the Navy helicopter, Admiral Hayes pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. He explained that her story had demonstrated something important about the veteran community's capacity to support those who supported them. Sarah, Admiral Hayes said, veterans understand that service sometimes requires personal sacrifice, and they never forget when someone makes that sacrifice on their behalf. You helped one veteran, but your story has inspired thousands of others to ensure you're recognized and supported. That's how military communities work. We take care of our own, and we take care of those who take care of us. Later that afternoon, as the excitement of the ceremony settled into quiet satisfaction, Sarah visited Harold to share her amazement at how their simple relationship had evolved into something so significant. Harold was delighted by the recognition Sarah had received but not surprised by the veteran community's response to her sacrifice. Sarah, Harold explained, when you chose to help me despite the risks to your career, you honored something sacred in military culture. Veterans spend their entire lives learning that the mission comes before personal comfort, and that we protect each other even when it's difficult or dangerous. You demonstrated those same values when you cared for me. Harold also revealed that his health had continued improving dramatically since leaving the hospital. The combination of proper medical care, emotional support during his recovery, and renewed connection with his veteran community had given him energy and purpose he hadn't felt in years. He had even begun mentoring younger veterans through his radio network, sharing his experience and offering guidance to those struggling with isolation or health challenges. 6 months later, Sarah had completed her veteran healthcare specialization training and was working as a lead nurse educator at Liberty Veterans Medical Center. Her patient care philosophy had been adopted as a model program for veteran healthcare facilities nationwide, and she regularly spoke at conferences about the importance of treating veterans with dignity, respect, and understanding of their unique needs. Harold had become a volunteer patient advocate at the medical center, using his experience and perspective to help other veterans navigate the healthcare system. His radio network had evolved into a formal support group that connected isolated veterans with community resources and peer support. The small apartment that had once seemed like a lonely prison had become the hub of a thriving veteran support network. The partnership between Sarah and Harold had grown into a friendship that enriched both their lives while serving as an inspiration to the broader veteran and healthcare communities. Their story demonstrated that individual acts of compassion could create ripple effects that transformed entire systems and inspired others to embrace higher standards of care and service. Sarah often reflected on the lessons she had learned from her decision to prioritize Harold's well-being over institutional rules. She had discovered that sometimes the right choice required accepting short-term consequences for long-term principles, and that communities of people who shared those principles would ultimately provide support and recognition for such choices. Most importantly, Sarah had learned that nursing was indeed about more than medical procedures and institutional compliance. At its heart, nursing was about seeing the whole person, understanding their needs beyond symptoms, and being willing to advocate for their well-being even when it involved personal risk. These lessons had made her not just a better nurse, but a better person who understood the true meaning of service and sacrifice.